This morning, we start off with an introduction. We need to know what stress is before we can consider all the bad things that can happen to us given high levels of chronic stress. The first interaction we discuss is that between stress and your immune system. And for the most part, stress is going to cause immunosuppression. But I'll also talk about stress-enhancing inflammation. Then we take our first break for the day for about 10 minutes, and we wrap up the morning with eating, reproduction, and growth. Then we take our lunch break. It should be at about 11:30. I can't guarantee you it will be right at 11:30, maybe a few minutes early, maybe a few minutes late. Regardless, you will have a full hour for your lunch. We come back from lunch. We start the afternoon topics. The first afternoon topics are sleep and pain. We take our first afternoon break. We start again with depression, helplessness, and PTSD. These are all mood disorders that are heavily impacted by stress. And then we wrap up the day with cognition, aging, and coping. Now, there's coping information in every segment of today's talk, but a bulk of it comes at the end. As a matter of fact, this slide, this schedule slide, is your first coping tip. And that is, when you go into an unknown situation and you know it's not going to be too aversive, try to gather as much information about that setting as you can. It's going to do two important things for you. Number one, it makes you a better predictor of what's to come, and successful prediction helps to minimize your stress response. Number two, it gives you more control over that situation. You know what the topic order, you know when the breaks are. So you know when you can get up and check your text messages. You know when you should be tuning in and listening and when you can go to sleep. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about telomeres because this will help us to understand exactly how this is happening. Telomeres, you have them in every cell in your body, and they're in the nucleus. So at the heart of every cell you have is a nucleus, and within this nucleus contains all of your DNA, the genes that you have, that code for all the proteins that you make. When a cell divides, the DNA has to be replicated so that each new daughter cell has its own copy of the chromosomes of the genes, and they have to be pulled apart. So they're pulled apart by what are called telomeres. And every time a cell divides, the telomeres get a little bit shorter. And that means that telomeres are counting cell divisions. They are acting as life clocks for your cells. And when telomeres get too short, these cells can no longer divide. They have reached senescence, and the next step is they're going to die. Now, lucky for you, you have an enzyme called telomerase in your body that re-extends telomere length. So it's less likely then that your cells are going to die. However, under chronic stress, you see a reduction in telomerase activity. And that's because glucocorticoid hormones, cortisol, reduce telomerase activity. So if telomerase isn't doing its job, your telomeres are more likely to get shorter. What are some factors that contribute to this? Proliferative stress, aging, smoking, diet, obesity, again via visceral fat, and release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Let's focus on this first one here, proliferation. This is especially important for white blood cells. Because when you have an allergic reaction, when you have a cut and it becomes infected, your immune system goes through this proliferative bloom. They divide, the white blood cells divide and divide and divide to conquer that infectious agent. In that regard, white blood cells have a lot of proliferative stress. They will be very sensitive to reduction in telomere length. And that's part of the factor as to why you lose your T cells with high levels of chronic stress.